I remember how nervous I was before I started my first job at a secondary school in Maidenhead, UK. In fact, in hindsight, I realized I had this deep-seated fear. I didn't know what of exactly, but obviously starting a new job. But it was going to be much deeper, the trial. It's funny how sometimes subconsciously you know you're going to enter a time in your life when you're going to be tested and where things are going to be particularly difficult. I went for the job not knowing what I'm going to face. My strength usually is in being informal with people, with children, and speaking in a classroom formally in front of 30 kids was not something I relished. I wasn't looking forward to it. I knew I had to have a job, and that's why I went for teaching. I thereby embarked on the toughest time, the toughest experience I've had in England since my coming there to live there from Israel. I was afraid, and then at the same time, I did everything I could to overcome the difficulties. There was something I discovered through that first year of teaching, and that was that the very essence of my difficulty was the fact that there was a dichotomy inside me between my soft approach, kind, friendly, and the harsher. And that was, in fact, a dichotomy which I picked up from my parents. My father was very kind, very gentle, loving, full of mercy, and whenever he corrected us, it was more like pleading with us to behave than actually disciplining us. My mother, on the other hand, who was also very loving, was much harder, much firmer, but she didn't, in fact, understand discipline either. So she ended up being too harsh. And in fact, I discovered through the first year of teaching that these two warring factions within me caused me a lot of trouble when it came to disciplining a classroom of 30 children. I had no problem, in fact, with preparing lessons or the teaching materials or anything like that. It was just being able to hold a class in a formal setting and to, in fact, harness the children to listen, which is not an unknown problem for beginning teachers. That was, in fact, the very beginning of being dug up, ploughed up, literally. 4 years of struggle and trial and failing and picking myself up again and failing again, and I was absolutely horrified by the whole experience. But looking back, I felt it was a fantastic preparation for what was to come. As I was being broken, the ground was being prepared for me to find a completely different way, the way of faith. I felt devastated, by the fact that there was no support or sympathy from the people who were in charge, the head of department, the head of the school. I mean, they themselves are horrified and they're worried about their reputation far more than anything else. But I soldiered on and found that I was able to overcome, and finally I succeeded in learning how to manage a classroom. And my style, my preferred style, ended up being far more like my father than like my mother. In fact, I did some counseling and co-counseling at that time that somehow managed to bridge between those two sides. And finally, even the children could tell the difference. And finally, I managed to overcome those difficulties. But felt really broken nonetheless, very upset, my pride was down to zero. Even though I've overcome and even though I've succeeded, nonetheless, the experience was one of being broken. And that prepared the ground for the next stage. So here is today's first live in a series of lives that I will, whereby I feel I should share the path of preparation that led me find God, or rather should I say God finding me. The dominant feeling was one of feeling broken, even though on the surface I managed to pull myself through. That was a beautiful, looking back, that was a beautiful time really of finding that I had to consider so much about myself and why I was there and what I was doing. And therefore, I feel that this is something that is a signpost for anyone who find themselves in a whirlpool of hardship, because it can so well lead to the next wonderful step.